They called her the family disappointment. She didn't have a degree, didn't follow the plan, didn't make headlines, at least not the kind her parents cared about. But behind closed doors, with no applause and no permission, she built something that would one day save the very people who once turned their backs on her. This is the story of Isabella Nguyen, the girl who left with 3 suitcases and a laptop, and came back as the woman no one could ignore. My name is Isabella Nguyen. I was born and raised in Redfield, Colorado, a quiet town where the mountains stretched high and expectations stretched even higher. In our family, success wasn't about happiness, it was about hierarchy, degrees, titles, prestige. My father, Dr. Henry Nguyen, had been a history professor at Colorado Western University for over 25 years. Always in a pressed shirt, always with a book in hand, he spoke like every sentence was part of a lecture. My mother, Margaret, was the principal of Redfield High. To her, discipline wasn't just a rule, it was a way of breathing. Mistakes? They weren't tolerated. And dreams? Only if they fit within the family mold. Then there was Eliza, my older sister, the golden child. She recited the Gettysburg Address at age 5, got into Yale at 16. By 24, she was already finishing her neurology residency at Stanford. At every dinner, her name was repeated like a hymn. Eliza just published a paper. Eliza's been invited to speak at Johns Hopkins. Eliza saved a patient's life today. And then there was me. I liked to fix things. Old laptops, broken speakers, jammed printers. When I was 14, I built my first website for the local bakery, and in 2 weeks, their cinnamon rolls were shipping out of state. I thought they'd be proud, but when I showed my mother the sales dashboard, she barely looked up from her paperwork. "You should be focusing on SAT prep," she said flatly. And my father, he didn't even blink. "Tech support is not a future, Isabella, unless you want to end up behind a desk fixing Wi-Fi for the rest of your life." That night I stayed up late, not coding, but crying quietly, with my laptop open and my heart slowly closing. For years I tried to fit in. I enrolled in AP classes I hated. I joined the debate team, even though public speaking made my chest tighten. I applied to Columbia just to please them. But every time I looked at my sister's framed Yale acceptance letter on the wall, I didn't feel inspired. I felt invisible. And then, one spring evening during my senior year, it all came to a quiet stop. We were sitting at the dinner table, college applications neatly stacked in front of me, Stanford, Princeton, MIT. My father had even color-coded the folders. My mother had printed out scholarship deadlines. I took a breath, looked them both in the eye, and said the words that changed everything. "I'm not applying to college. I'm going to start my own company. I already have 2 clients and a working prototype." Silence. Then, a fork hit the plate. My mother froze mid-bite. My father stood slowly. His voice was sharper than I'd ever heard. "Not under this roof." He didn't ask what I was building. He didn't ask why I believed in it. He just looked at me like I had failed. I didn't scream, I didn't beg. I went upstairs, packed 3 bags, grabbed my old Dell laptop, and walked out. No one followed me. No one said goodbye. They assumed I'd be back in a month, begging to be rescued. But I wasn't coming back. Because for the first time in my life, I was choosing my own future, not theirs. My first apartment was on the 2nd floor of a fading brick building in East Aurora. 460 square feet. The heater barely worked. The windows rattled when the wind blew, and it always blew. The kitchen was so narrow I could touch both walls if I stretched out my arms. There were cockroaches in the hallway and water stains on the ceiling, but it was mine. I set up a folding table under the only working outlet in the living room. That became my office. My old laptop sat on top of 2 thick textbooks I never finished. Every morning I brewed coffee using a hand-me-down drip machine that let out a groan louder than my alarm. And then I worked. From sunup until the streetlights flickered on. No salary, no insurance, no warm congratulations from family. Just me, a blank screen, and an idea. I called it Rust Thread, a small platform to help local artisans sell their handmade goods online. It wasn't revolutionary, it didn't use AI, but it was simple, it was honest, and it made sense. Colorado was full of craftspeople, potters, candle makers, wood carvers, but most had no idea how to set up a website or manage online orders. I wanted to be their quiet partner, the one behind the screen making things work. My first 2 clients were Ms. Delaney, a retired teacher who made lavender soap, and Benny, a war veteran who carved walking sticks. They didn't know how to upload product photos, so I visited their homes with a borrowed DSLR camera and a roll of butcher paper as a backdrop. Every order they got, I took 5% commission, nothing more. After a month, I had made a grand total of $230. I lived off cup noodles, canned beans, and boiled eggs. I wore the same jeans for days. And at night, I'd sit by the window and wonder, quietly, if maybe my parents were right. One Friday afternoon in February, I was rear-ended at an intersection while delivering a package to Ms. Delaney. It wasn't serious, but my old Civic gave out with a final wheezing cough. The repair shop quoted me $780. That number might as well have been a million. I sat on my living room floor that night, surrounded by rolls of packing tape, blank shipping labels, and a half-eaten granola bar, just stuck. Maybe this was it. Maybe my big dream was nothing more than a phase, a childish rebellion that had run out of steam. I almost called my dad. Almost. But instead, I opened my laptop, scrolled through a local event board, and saw something I had dismissed a dozen times before. Aurora Small Business Meetup, Downtown Library, 6 p.m. I didn't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe a job lead, maybe someone who'd believe in what I was building. But that night, I brushed the crumbs off my coat, printed a business card at a copy store, and walked into that library like I had something to prove, even if it was just to myself. That night would change everything. The library was warmer than I expected. I found myself in a circle of metal chairs, surrounded by people twice my age, sipping lukewarm coffee and swapping stories about inventory issues and shipping delays. They were bakers, shop owners, crafters, trying to stay afloat in a world that had gone digital too fast for them to catch up. I almost left. Until she stood up. Marcia Ellison. Silver hair pulled into a neat twist, jeans, a white blouse, no-nonsense demeanor. Founder of Pennywise Systems, a small business accounting software company based out of Denver. She spoke like she'd been through wars, and somehow still loved the battlefield. When the Q&A ended, I waited until the crowd cleared, palms sweaty, heart hammering like a drum in my chest. I walked up and nearly dropped my homemade business card. "I'm Isabella," I stammered. "I run a small site that helps artisans sell online. No funding, no degree, but I have clients, real ones." Marcia didn't smile right away. Instead, she tilted her head and asked one question that would change my life. "Do you have customer data?" I blinked. "Yes," I said, opening my laptop with shaking fingers. I showed her the charts, basic, honest, but they told a story. A few $100s here, a few dozen sales there, growth even if it was slow. Marcia scrolled silently. Then she looked up and said, "You don't need more sellers, you need more structure." "What do you mean?" "Instead of selling a bar of soap at a time, why not sell your order system to 50 soap shops at once? You're building tools. You just don't know it yet." I stood there stunned. For the first time, someone wasn't asking where I went to school. She was asking where I could go next. That night, I went home and stared at my computer screen until sunrise. And in the morning, I did the scariest thing I'd done since walking away from my family. I let go. I shut down RustThread, archived the code, canceled the tiny hosting plan, and opened a blank page. At the top, I typed a new name, Hearthlink Systems. Because this wasn't just about candles and baskets anymore. It was about building a hearth, something warm, stable, quietly powerful, for small businesses that had been left behind. I rewrote everything from scratch, line by line, built dashboards, created modular templates, integrated basic inventory tools. And when I ran out of energy, I didn't stop. I boiled more coffee. I kept going. I messaged Jared, a UX design student I'd met at the library meetup. Offered him $150 a month and all the ramen he could eat. He said yes. We turned my apartment into a war room. Used instant noodle boxes as laptop stands. Hung a whiteboard on the fridge. Pitched new features between bites of cold pizza. Every morning, I sent out cold emails to every boutique retailer I could find from Montana to New Mexico. Most never replied. A few laughed when they heard I'd never been to college. But then, 2 weeks later, an email landed in my inbox. Subject line, "Can your software track inventory by location?" From Michelle Reyes, Director of Ops at Aspenwood Comine, a handcrafted furniture chain with 28 stores across 5 states. I read it 10 times. Then I ran outside in my socks and screamed. The contract with Aspenwood was for $320,000 with $100,000 paid up front. When the check cleared, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in silence on my creaky floor, holding my coffee mug like it might suddenly float away. For the first time since leaving Redfield, I could breathe. Not just survive, breathe. I hired 2 part-time developers and a remote project manager. We moved out of my apartment and into a tiny co-working space in downtown Boulder. Jared brought in a mini fridge. I bought a second whiteboard. It felt like home. Over the next 10 months, Hearthlink Systems grew faster than I ever imagined. We signed 2 more regional chains, launched a major update to our dashboard, and were named Startup to Watch by Colorado Tech Weekly. The Denver Journal called us the quiet backbone of Main Street retail. I wanted to frame that headline, but I didn't. Instead, I printed it, folded it in half, and tucked it away in a drawer. Because some victories aren't meant for display. Some are meant for protection. It started with a forwarded email from my mother. She didn't mean to send it to me. It was an old address I used in high school, one she must have forgotten to delete. Attached was a mortgage delinquency notice, 17 days past due. The house I grew up in, the one with the cracked porch steps and dusty piano, was slipping away. The same week, my father's name appeared in a local news article. Retired due to departmental restructuring after 26 years at Colorado Western. And my sister Eliza, she was too busy, according to Mom. New hospital, new twins, no time. I stared at the email for a long time. No one had asked me for help. Maybe they still thought I was living off vending machine dinners and failed startup dreams. They didn't know that their dropout daughter had just been offered a funding round she politely declined. I opened a blank document. And I did what I always do when no one else shows up. I showed up myself. I called Robert Hale, our company attorney. Set up a trust, I told him. Name it Redfield Educational Initiative. Make it look like a nonprofit grant. Within 2 weeks, the mortgage was current, paid monthly by a fund honoring educators who've shaped small-town America. No one asked questions. Next came my mother's thyroid treatment. Out-of-network medication, $1,500 per month. Covered quietly by a health support grant from Western Wellness Collaborative. She mentioned it once in passing during a rare phone call. It's strange, she said. A nonprofit stepped in to help. Guess there's still good people out there. I said nothing, just smiled, and approved the next wire transfer. Then there was my father. The man who once said I'd end up behind a help desk fixing routers for people with real jobs. I created a shell LLC, Stonehill Advisory, registered it in Boise. Through it, I offered him a remote curriculum development role on civic literacy. Monthly compensation, $2,000. He didn't hesitate. Started writing outlines and bragging to his friends about being a state-level consultant. And I read every file, even left comments, not because I had to. Because somewhere deep down I still wanted him to feel useful. When Eliza's twins couldn't get into the fancy bilingual daycare she always boasted about, 2 anonymous scholarships appeared under the names Liam and Noel, $9,000 each, no conditions. She posted on Facebook, "It's a miracle, God always provides." I laughed. Sometimes God writes checks through Delaware LLCs. In less than 3 years, I spent over $110,000 supporting the very people who once told me I was a disappointment. No one knew. No one asked. And somehow that made it easier to keep doing. Because I wasn't helping them for recognition. I was doing it for the girl I used to be, the one who sat at that dinner table, heart in her throat, knowing she'd never be enough for them. But maybe she was always more than enough. They just never saw it. Thanksgiving came that year with gray skies and a light drizzle over Redfield. I hadn't been back home in over 4 years. But something inside me, not anger, not revenge, just resolve, told me this time I wouldn't come quietly. I drove in a rented Toyota, wearing an old coat and boots I'd worn before I had payroll to manage. In the back seat was a slim leather folder, printed on premium paper, color-coded and carefully tabbed. Also in my bag, a USB drive with the keynote presentation I delivered at the West Coast Tech Leadership Summit just 6 weeks earlier. Mom greeted me at the door, apron on, already flustered with stuffing and ceramic platters. Dad was in his recliner, reading the business section like he hadn't missed a beat since tenure ended. Eliza floated down the stairs in heels, makeup perfect. Her husband, Nick, unbuckled the twins and whispered, "Let's keep the kids away from Aunt Izzy's laptop. Don't want them accidentally becoming coders at 3. I didn't flinch, just smiled. Dinner started at 6 p.m. sharp, as always. Mom raised a glass. To family, health, and tradition. Dad followed with a speech about Eliza's medical accolades and how proud he was of Nick for stepping up as a provider. Not a single word about me, not even my name. So I cleared my throat and placed the folder on the table. "I'd like to share something," I said. Forks paused midair. Mom's brow furrowed. Eliza's lips tightened. I pulled out the first page, a cover story from Mountain West Tech Weekly. My photo, my name. Isabella Nguyen, founder and CEO of Hearthlink Systems, the woman reinventing Main Street retail. Dad snatched the paper, flipping through like he was hunting for a misprint. "Where did you get this?" he barked. "I didn't get it," I replied softly. "I built it." I opened the folder, laying out bank transfer records, healthcare reimbursements, scholarship grant letters, and the fake employment contract from Stonehill Advisory. I pointed page by page. "You've been living in the house because I paid off the mortgage. Mom's medication, covered under a wellness trust I created. Eliza's twins, I funded their daycare through a Shell scholarship." Silence, total suffocating silence. Then Dad stood. "You're making this up," he said, voice rising. "A college dropout, with no credentials? What, this is your little fantasy?" I didn't look away. "You've been living off my fantasy for 3 years. Mom whispered, Why didn't you tell us?" I turned to her. Because every time I opened my mouth, you reminded me I wasn't Eliza. Eliza leaned in then, arms crossed. I work 14-hour shifts. I save lives. And you, what, you code in sweatpants and think that makes you somebody? I stared at her, calm. I've fallen asleep on my keyboard. I've eaten ramen cold because I couldn't afford to boil water. I built something out of nothing. And yes, I am somebody. Dad slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. You're a fraud, a disgrace. I stood up. No, I'm your daughter, and I am done being ashamed just to make you comfortable. I gathered the folder, slid everything back into my bag. As I turned toward the door, Mom reached out and asked, voice trembling, Izzy, what about next month's support? I stopped. People like me, we don't ask for much, just to be seen, to be respected, not worshipped, just understood. But if even that is too much, then the money stops too. I looked at her. People who see me as a burden can't keep living off my strength. And then I walked out. It was still raining, but the air felt light. Like I'd finally left a room where I'd spent my whole life holding my breath. The morning after Thanksgiving, I boarded a 6:45 a.m. flight out of Denver. Destination, Clearwater, Florida, a place I had visited once, years ago, during a business trip. Back then, I told myself I'd return only when I could afford to stay. Now I wasn't just returning. I was reclaiming. The house sat quietly on a side street near the coast. White walls, red tile roof, and a backyard lined with grapefruit trees. I'd bought it 3 years ago on impulse when HearthLink signed its third major client. Until now, it had been just a vacation home. Somewhere I stored extra blankets and unopened wine. But this time, I unpacked everything. First to go, the bland rental furniture and fake antique clocks. I hired a local interior architect named Elena, and we worked together for 3 weeks straight, redesigning the space with warm wood, soft whites, and open light. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was mine. Meanwhile, I called Robert, my lawyer, and gave him 3 instructions. 1. Dissolve the Redfield Educational Initiative. 2. Terminate all contracts related to Stonehill Advisory. 3. Cease the healthcare payments and daycare scholarships. No explanations, no warnings. Just closure. For years, I had supported them because I thought that maybe, if I was useful enough, they'd let me belong. But now, I didn't need to belong to anyone. I just needed to be whole. Clearwater breathed differently. There was salt in the wind and softness in the mornings. Our new office opened in the West Bay District, 9th floor, glass windows, walnut floors, ocean view. Jared relocated. Rachel and Dominic from our Denver team followed. This is it, huh? Rachel said on our first day. No more hiding? No more double life, I said, smiling. From now on, we build in the light. And we did. In the first quarter alone, HearthLink signed 3 new Florida-based clients. A Boston investment fund submitted a revised valuation proposal, $59.7 million, excluding the AI feature set we were prepping. But I wasn't chasing numbers anymore. I wasn't hiding them either. I wore what I wanted. A real watch, tailored clothes, lipstick sometimes. Not to impress, but because I could. When people asked what I did for a living, I didn't say small software tools for retailers. I said, I run a systems company that helps local businesses thrive. That was the truth. And I wasn't afraid of the truth anymore. One Friday evening, I attended a women in tech mixer at a beachside cafe. That's where I met Caleb Meyer, digital transformation consultant for nonprofits. Plaid shirt, kind eyes, the kind of handshake that didn't try too hard to prove anything. We talked about systems, sure, but mostly about community, about reaching founders in rural areas, about grilled grouper, and playlists from high school. 3 dinners later, we were barefoot on the sand, sharing earbuds and passing a mint pineapple cocktail back and forth. He looked at me and said, You're the only person I've ever met who built a multimillion-dollar company and managed to keep it a secret. I laughed. Maybe I was afraid that if they knew, I said, they'd try to make me someone I'm not. And now, he asked? Now, if they can't accept who I am, they don't get to be part of my life. We didn't toast to anything official that night. Just clinked our glasses, soft and simple, like a promise that didn't need words. Every Sunday, I host dinner in my backyard. A long table, string lights, homemade bread, and no PowerPoint slides in sight. Sometimes it's Caleb, sometimes it's Jared, sometimes it's a 22-year-old founder from El Paso we just funded through the new Forge Forward grant. We don't talk about exit strategies. We talk about purpose and choice and what it means to live without fear. And as I listen, I realize I don't need a family to take me back, because I've built a community that never once asked me to be anything but exactly who I am. The call came on a Sunday morning. I was kneading dough in the kitchen when my phone rang. Caller ID, landline, Redfield CO. I stared at it for a long moment. I'd seen that number flash across my screen dozens of times over the years, and each time I let it go to voicemail. But something about that morning, the light, the quiet, made me pick up. Hello? There was a pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in months. It's me, my mother said, her voice smaller than I remembered. Linda. I didn't respond right away. She continued, slower this time. Your father and I, we're planning a trip to Florida next month. We were wondering if we could see you. She didn't say stay with you. She didn't ask for money. Just see you. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the hum on the other end, then asked quietly, in what capacity? As our daughter, she said, her voice almost cracking. Just our daughter, if you'll allow it. I didn't give an answer that day, because it wasn't an automatic yes, and it never would be again. 3 weeks later, I chose a small cafe by the shore. Not a formal office, not my house, neutral ground, safe distance. I arrived 10 minutes early and took the corner table outside, ordered a cold brew, watched the tide roll in. At exactly 9 a.m., they arrived. Dad moved more slowly than I remembered, hair now almost entirely white. Mom wore a beige floral dress, the kind she used to save for church. They sat down. No hugs, no excuses, just silence, and in that silence, I realized I wasn't nervous. I wasn't seeking approval, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was steady, like the still water beyond the dunes. Dad spoke first. I read your interview in Founders Weekly, he said. What you've built, it's impressive. I nodded, thank you. Mom placed her hand lightly on the table. It took us a long time to understand that maybe you never needed to be anyone's copy. I looked at her directly. You don't need to say that if it's not true, I said. I didn't come here for a polished speech. She lowered her eyes. And for the first time in my life, I saw not the principal, not the perfectionist, but a woman who simply didn't know what to say when control no longer worked. Dad took a deep breath. You once asked me if I didn't see you as the pride of this family, then what was I seeing? He paused. Today I want to answer. You're proof that I was wrong. I didn't expect those words, and I didn't let them define me either. Mom, Dad, I said softly. I no longer live for approval. I didn't build Hearthlink to earn your respect. I built it because it was in me. And I'm proud of the life I have, not because it's perfect, but because it's honest. They nodded. No arguments, no protests, just acknowledgement. We talked for another 20 minutes. About the new seaside park. About Eliza's kids. Even though I wasn't ready to see them yet. About nothing, really. And maybe that was enough. As we stood to leave, Mom reached out for a hug. Not tight, not tearful. Just long enough for me to feel that, for once, she wasn't hugging me to mold me into anything. They flew back to Colorado that evening. I didn't wave goodbye. I walked along the beach, barefoot, phone in hand. Texted Caleb, I did it. He called within seconds. Did what? I sat across from them. No anger, no fear, and still completely myself. He paused, then said, Then you've already won. Every Sunday we still gather in the backyard. Bread, lights, voices, the sound of becoming. Because I understand now. I didn't forgive them because they changed. I forgave because I changed. Because healing isn't about being welcomed back. It's about choosing where you belong and walking forward, whole. You don't need to win everyone's approval to live a meaningful life. You don't need a perfect family to feel whole. Sometimes freedom comes not from being accepted, but from learning to accept yourself, fully, fearlessly, and without apology. Isabella didn't wait for forgiveness. She built her own table, her own circle, and her own kind of success. And that is the sweetest kind of ending there is. If this story moved you, helped you breathe a little deeper, or reminded you of your own strength, subscribe to Sweet Revenge, Happy Ending for more powerful stories of resilience, reinvention, and rising beyond what others expect of you. Your story matters, and we're here to tell it, one truth at a time.